Good evening, and because it is our final lecture, I too would like to say thank you, because it is a very difficult thing to arrange these lectures and classes. Work has to be done on this months and months in advance, almost a year in advance, in order to find halls and accommodations. And every year, with the exception of the first year, as you know, this has been in the care of Mr. Eastman. And so to him we owe a very great debt for the care and the devotion that he has given to this work and to all of us here. He has made it possible, really, for the work to be given as regularly as it has been given and as orderly. And of course, to all of those who have helped them in this work, our deep gratitude until they are better thanked. I would like to say thank you to all of you for being here. But this matter of thanking you brings up another subject, and that is really the important one. If you weren't here, I would not be fulfilling myself here, because it has been given me to go out into the world and to carry this message. And therefore, there must be a sense of thanks, of appreciation for your being here, and for all of you who have been here the many times through these years. My gratitude is expressed not so much in words. As a matter of fact, if I remember rightly, this is the first time that I have ever expressed thanks verbally. And the reason is that a verbal expression of thanks is only important if it is the outer form of an actual, substantial experience. In other words, unless my thanks were backed up by living in accord with this teaching, then I would have nothing really to be thankful for, nor would you. And therefore, the actual thanks that I feel is expressed in the demonstration that you attain, the demonstration of peace, of comfort, of God realization. Whatever comes into your life of a more harmonious nature, more especially of a more spiritual nature, this adequately expresses my thanks. In the same way, thanks on your part only has meaning in proportion as there is within you some form of experience that makes that gratitude real. Because this has such an important bearing on the subject of our supply, I would like to go into it a little further with you. This has to do not only with my individual demonstration of abundance, if you wish to call it that, my individual demonstration of God appearing as infinite abundance, but in turn it means your individual demonstration, and unless you know the principle of supply, your supply becomes more or less accidental. It is not actually the manifestation of a definite principle. And actually, since we are living the spiritual life, we really mean to be living according to spiritual law, the law of God, and experiencing the things of God. And since it has been said, Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine, we are to assume that it is natural for us to experience abundance. But the question is, how? What is the principle? And of course, the error of most religious teachings is in the belief that supply is something that comes to you or comes to me. And therefore, we devote a great deal of time to praying for supply. This is all a waste of time, not only a waste of our time, but it's a waste of time that could be profitably used. Well, washing dishes would be better than praying for supply. Supply does not come to us. Supply finds its way out from within us. Supply isn't something that can come to us. Supply is something that we express. Supply doesn't differ. It is just as spiritual as integrity, loyalty, morality, honesty. Now, you can't get these, and you can't even pray for them. For you know, as well as anyone else does, that you embody these in your own consciousness, whether or not you are expressing them to the fullest of your understanding. Well, that is another question. But there isn't anyone in this room who doubts for a minute that they have the full measure of integrity, of honesty, loyalty, fidelity, benevolence within themselves. And the question is, to what extent do we wish to express these, or what excuses can we make for leaving them unexpressed within ourselves? Now, supply is just as spiritual as these qualities, and therefore supply has to be expressed by us. It is not something that comes to us. It is something that goes out from us and then returns. The bread that you cast upon the waters, this is the bread that comes back to you. And that's why you find many people with burnt fingers. They are trying to get the bread that somebody else has placed on the waters. As you heard, I'm going down to speak to the men at Dartmoor Prison on Sunday. And I'm sure that some of them have burnt fingers from trying to reach out for some of the bread that belonged to someone else. Life does not permit our taking from another that which belongs to him. And therefore, the only supply to which we have spiritual title is the bread that we place on the water of life. That which goes out from us is that which comes back to us, pressed down and running over. But it cannot come back to us unless we send it forth. Now, since supply is spiritual, it is spiritually that we must express it in order for it to come back. And there are many ways given us by the Master as examples of how we may cast our bread upon the waters. To begin with, he tells us about forgiving 70 times 7, forgiving those who offend us, forgiving those who in any wise offend. He tells us about praying for our enemies, praying for those who despitefully use us, praying for those who persecute us. And this does not necessarily mean those who offend you or me. But remember that if they offend my neighbor, they are offending me. If they offend my country, they are offending me. If they offend my race, they are offending me. And in the last analysis, if they are offending this world at all, they are offending me. For we are all parts of one whole. There is only one God, one Father of us all, and therefore we are brothers and sisters. And whoever offends one of us offends all of us. And so it is, then, that we are called upon under this law of Christ to forgive those who offend, to pray for those who persecute and abuse. We are to pray for all enemies, even more than for our friends. It profiteth you nothing to pray for your friends, he says. You must pray for your enemies in order that you may be the child of God. Well, of course, to be the child of God means to be an heir of God, joint heir to all of the supply there is in heaven. But you only become an heir to the riches which God has to bestow as you learn to pray for your enemies, as you learn to pray for mankind's enemies, as you learn to forgive those who offend us, and even if they offend us 489 times, we are to forgive 490 times. I'm sure that we could never forgive 490 times and find them offending the 491st. Now, these are two ways in which we cast our bread upon the waters. These are two ways in which we demonstrate our spiritual supply. There are still others. And the greatest of these is gratitude. Gratitude takes many forms. Probably most of the benevolence that is done in this world, regardless of what form it takes, is done because of gratitude. Somebody is grateful for something and sends a check to CARE, or sends a check to the Tuberculosis Association or the Cancer Association, or to some other favorite charity. But as a rule, it is a gratitude, a sense of gratitude, that has prompted that act of benevolence. And so gratitude takes that particular form of benevolence in one way or another. In ancient days, gratitude was expressed through tithing. And it was taught that by tithing, one expressed their gratitude to the source from which they were deriving their spiritual food, their spiritual comfort. And that automatically meant the church. As long as tithing was done from this sense of gratitude, tithing was a blessing to those who tithe. It was a blessing to those who received the tithe, and it was a blessing to those who tithed. However, eventually some shrewd businessman figured out that by giving 10%, you might get 90% back. And tithing became more or less a business, a percentage deal. You give 10% to God, and He gives 90% back to you. And because of this, tithing lost its effectiveness and eventually disappeared as a general custom. It still exists among the Mormons. It still exists among the Quakers. It still exists among some minority groups. But on the whole, tithing is no longer recognized as it once was, as the means of our expressing our gratitude for that which we received from the spiritual source of our lives. Now, those who individually rediscover the joy, the pleasure, the privilege of tithing, and who follow it in the way the Master taught, anonymously, giving your benevolences without letting anyone know that you are doing it. Anyone who tithes in that fashion and from a motive of gratitude soon learns that there is a Father that seeth in secret, and a Father who rewardeth openly. Only care must be exercised that one doesn't tithe for the reward, for then again it gets to be a business proposition and not a spiritual one. Now, when an individual comes to the subject of tithing from the standpoint of gratitude, they could well afford in this modern day to change the mode from that which existed in ancient times, because in those days the church was the only avenue of benevolence, so that when an individual needed help, they more or less went to their church for it. Nowadays, church is almost the last place that a person would go for material help, because there are so many other avenues all of these movements, all of these funds, all of these different ways that cities, states, and nations have of taking care of those in temporary need. And so those who tithe would be wise not only to provide for their spiritual source, their church, or whatever substitutes for church in their experience, but likewise provide for these other avenues, whether you call them homes for the aged, or whether they are hospitals or orphanages or schools, whatever it may be. Provision must be made in order to prove that we love our neighbor as ourselves, and that we do not only believe that those of our religious household are our neighbors. Our neighbors are the people of all religions, all races, all colors, all creeds, and therefore from our tithe we should be sure to make some provision for these. In this way, we are likewise casting our bread upon the waters. We are putting out our bread, our supply, rather than looking for it to come in. And in doing this, we are proving that we have supply, even if it is measured in shillings. Now, gratitude has still another form, and to me, this is its greatest form, but that's just a personal observation. To you, one of the other forms of gratitude may be greater. To me, gratitude finds its highest expression in the realization of God as the invisible source of all that is visible. I doubt that I could ever bring myself to thank God for anything that I have, or thank God for anything that comes to me. I don't quite see gratitude in that way, probably because I don't believe in a God who just provides for me or sends to me. The God I understand is the God responsible for all of the good on this earth and in all of the other earths and all of the other planets that exist. And I do not believe that this has been done for me or for you, but it is a self-expression of God. In other words, I don't believe God created sunshine for me, or rain, or the cattle on 1,000 hills. I believe that all of these exist as God's expression of His own infinite being, of His own infinite abundance spread forth for the sons and daughters of God. Not for one or two, not for the favored few, but for all. And the fact that so few receive so little has nothing at all to do with God. It has to do with their individual receptivity. And one can only prove the amount of their receptivity by the amount of bread they cast upon the waters. Gratitude that fish are in the sea and birds are in the air, gratitude that there are cattle on 1,000 hills, that the trees are blooming now, showing forth God's grace, gratitude for all that we witness from waking in the morning until sleeping at night, and a lot more gratitude for the fact that life continues in sleep as well as when awake, and that even while we are at rest, the principle of life is at work for us. The recognition of this, the gratitude for this, is to me a high form of gratitude, because there is nothing personal in it. It is a sense of gratitude that the infinity of God is omnipresent for all of us to share, and that we are all sharing it in proportion to our own receptivity. There is no favoritism on the part of God giving more to one than to another. God has no favorite children. God has no favorite races. God has no favorite nations. Oh, there was a time, I remember, when some of us believed that our nations were quite virtuous, quite good, and the others not quite so. I think the last 40, 50 years' history is enough to convince all of us that it wouldn't do too well to claim virtues for one nation as against another. And therefore, it would be hard to believe that God is prospering one nation because it is so good, and punishing others with lack because it is so bad. As a matter of fact, that's a dangerous doctrine in view of the fact that the two nations we have all been fighting seem to be the most prosperous at this very moment. No, we find as we travel the spiritual path that we do not have health or abundance because of our virtues. Oh, there are so many beautiful, sweet, virtuous men and women suffering terribly with either disease or lack. And there are so many rascals abounding in health and supply that it's very difficult to accept any such doctrine as God's rewards and God's punishments. But many years on this path has shown me that our supply is in direct proportion to our receptivity. That is, to the degree of gratitude that we express, the degree of bread that we place upon the waters in the form of benevolence, in the form of forgiveness, in the form of praying for our enemies, and so forth, because we are then expressing spiritual principles. You know, there are lots of people who give away great fortunes of money, and yet, if you could examine it, you would find there is very little spiritual giving in it. There are other reasons for that giving. And probably that is why it was told us that the widow who gave the mite was so greatly blessed. In other words, it wasn't the amount of the giving, if you measure the amount in pounds or dollars, but it was the amount of giving in proportion to one's immediate possession. And so it is that it is impossible to measure how much we should give to be on the right side of God if you're going to do your measuring in matter. The only measuring stick is how much love are we giving, how much cooperation, how much recognition, how much praying, how much forgiving, how much tithing, how much secret giving, without drawing attention of man to ourselves. How much secret praying And here, of course, we come to one of the deepest principles in all of the Master's teaching, the principle of secrecy. Remember that right from the start of the Sermon on the Mount, he taught that we were to do our praying in secret. We were to let no man know. We were not to pray to be seen of men. And he told us that those who do pray openly receive a benefit from their fellow man, but lose the benefit that accrues from God. This is important to remember. Those who pray openly do receive some measure of benefit in the opinion of their fellow man, but thereby lose the grace of God. And so we have a choice to make whether we like the approval of man more than the grace of God. In the same way, then, he tells us about benevolence, that we must do it not to be seen of men, but secretly, not to let the left hand know what the right hand does, secretly do our benevolences, because if we do them openly, we do receive the approval of our fellow man, and we benefit by that, but we lose the grace of God. And so we have the choice. Would we rather have the approval of our neighbor or the grace of God? And the choice is with us. Now there is a reason for this. Truth, which is a synonym for God, for love, for the Christ, Spirit, truth is planted in us as a seed. That is the only way that truth can enter your consciousness or mine. Our teaching work, whether it is in work like this tonight, or as it has been the past 2 nights, or in our classwork, it is all alike. It is only the planting of seeds. And never let anyone tell you that spiritual teaching is anything other than the planting of seeds. If it were the full-blown truth itself, it would instantly lift all of us out of our seats and mount us right up to the heavens. But truth teaching is the planting of seeds in your consciousness and mine. Now, when a seed of truth is received in our consciousness, it is not the fruit ready to eat, ready to enjoy, or ready to share with our neighbor. It is only a seed. Now that this seed is planted in our consciousness, it must be nurtured. It must be fed. It must be tended. It must be cared for. It must be allowed to fulfill itself, to take root, to break open, to begin to blossom. And as we keep these gems of truth locked up within us, not sharing them with anybody, regardless of how close to us they may be. Because remember, if you do, you'll have the approval of whoever you share it with, but you lose the grace of God. Why? you're giving away that which does not yet belong to you, and that which is not yet fruit. It is only a seed. Now, you can't plant seeds out in your garden and keep digging them up and giving them away, and then 6 months later go back and find a crop. There's nothing there. You haven't allowed nature to work on those seeds. You haven't allowed the secret processes that go on deep within the earth to have their way with those seeds. And so it is that a seed planted, a seed of truth, planted in your consciousness or mine, takes time. Takes time to fulfill itself before it comes out as a full-blown realization. Now, while it is locked up inside of us in the dark, there is a process going on within us, an invisible spiritual process of, in the end, we might call it fulfillment. While it is taking place within us, I suppose we could liken it to that 9-month process of the child in the mother's womb. You can't dig that child out before the 9 months or 8 or 7. You just can't and expect the right fruitage. It must remain there. It must be fed. It must be allowed to fulfill itself. And then when its time has come, it can be birthed. And so it is that whether it is our gratitude to God or to each other, whether it is our benevolences, whether it is our forgiving of our enemies, whether it is our praying for our enemies, these are seeds of truth that we take within ourselves and live with. And we practice them over and over and over again. And while this process is taking place of fulfillment, the day does come when out pops the baby, and it is a full-blown baby. Then we can start sharing, giving, doing what we like. Excuse me, forgot for a moment. Up here, you don't give your babies and share them. In Hawaii, it is a little more common. They do give babies and share them. They have so many that when a neighbor doesn't have enough, they do give 1 or 2 of their own to fulfill their neighbor's need. But we do share the babies that come to us in the way of truth. Eventually, that is what is happening in the life of practitioners and teachers. Truth that has come to fruition within them and that has become a demonstrated truth, they can then go out and share. And the fact that it has become demonstrated truth within them makes it of power. That was why when the Master spoke, they said, this man speaks with authority. Why? Because he had had his long, long years, up until he was 30 years of age, of keeping it locked up within himself, not trying to preach, not trying to teach, not trying to heal, just to ponder these truths within himself, ponder them, think about them, live with them, practice them, be grateful for them, and then when he was ready, he could go out and demonstrate that which had become full-blown in him, his spiritual grace. So it is. Very often, a truth reveals itself to us, sometimes when we're reading a book, sometimes when we're meditating, writing, all of a sudden a truth that we have intellectually known becomes a living, vital, realized truth. And when that happens, we can go out and give it. And then we find that we are giving it with signs following. Many students know that I never teach a truth that has not first been realized and demonstrated by me. There may be 1,000 books on many facets of truth, and I never speak of them. For years, many, many years, students asked me about the Sermon on the Mount. And my answer would always be, I have read it, but I don't understand it. It isn't realized. Therefore, I am not going to comment on it. And it was in 1956 that a full-blown realization was given to me while sitting on the platform in the middle of a class. And for all of 1956 in my classes, this that revealed itself to me was given out, because now it was a realized truth. And even then, it has not been made public in writing, and it won't be until next year. It is in process of being published now. That is what we are supposed to do with truth. There are loads of truths in the Bible. No one has a right to speak of them, except the one or the two or the three that come alive for them, that live and prove and demonstrate themselves. Then one has something from the Bible to share. So it is, if you can feel any rightness at all in what I have said to you tonight, you can take this subject of supply, keep it locked up within your consciousness, and begin to practice it. Find some period each day for forgiving the enemies of the world as well as your own, and praying for them. Find some period in each day for tithing of one sort or another. Practice the idea even of setting aside a specific amount of your income for whatever benevolences you wish to support. And keep these things secret. Do them because something within you tells you that what I'm saying to you is the fruitage of experience, and not only mine, but the experience that I have witnessed in the lives of many on the spiritual path. In the same way, during these talks, which really were classes, I have given you the three great words: omnipresence, omnipotence, omniscience. There's no use talking about them. You will just be taking seeds and scattering them on top of the earth instead of burying them in the earth. But take those three words into your consciousness, ponder them, and every time that some evidence presents itself to you of some erroneous form of power, realize within yourself, this can't be true if omnipotence is true. Every time that something presents itself to you of an erroneous or destructive nature, realize within yourself, in the light of omnipresence, this presence cannot be. Any time that temptation comes to you to go to God and tell God something about your problems, immediately bring to your thought the word omniscience, all knowledge, all wisdom, and remind yourself God already knows. And work with those three words conscientiously, continuously, but above all things silently and secretly, until they too have opportunity to take root in you and to come forth as the full-grown babe. And then you will understand the meaning of that experience of immaculate conception and virgin birth. You will understand then that all conception is spiritual, that these ideas are conceived within you. These ideas take root in you. They are in you as a seed of truth, and you will carry them and work with them and ponder them and rejoice over them until one day you will find these seeds of truth come forth as virgin birth. They will come forth with signs following. They will come forth with joy and with singing. And you will find this, that the wise men of the world will come and bow down to that truth that has just been born of you. You will find that men and women will pay homage to you for this truth that has now been born in you, from you, and is now going forth into the world to bless the world. It may be that when you first present truth to the world, that you too may have to take it down into Egypt and hide it for a while, because the world's reaction to truth always is to attempt to destroy it, because truth destroys the comfort of human life. Truth destroys material good as well as material evil. Truth destroys personal good and raises up in its place divine love, the love that we can share with each other, not as members of a tiny religious group, but a love that we can share with friends and enemies, a bounty that we can share not only with our church, but if we like, we can help to support a half a dozen other churches. Why? Because the nature of our neighbor is such that we owe our neighbor love regardless of his religious or medical opinions. We can even finance his church, his hospitals, while we are not using them. You will find that truth makes people very uncomfortable, except those who are searching for truth. It makes them uncomfortable because, well, I'll put it this way, for the same reason that as we come more and more to the spiritual way of life, we can indulge less and less of the world's ways of life. You will notice how our language changes, how curse words and swear words disappear out of our vocabulary. Obscenities and nasty stories all disappear from our experience. You will notice that the further we get into the Spirit, the further away we get from the world's modes and means of living, and then they become more obnoxious to us than they ever were before. And so it is that we feel more discomfort over some trifling offense than some of the world's people do over the major offenses. And so it is that when you present truth in any concrete form to those who are still loving this human life, be assured of this: you are offending them, and they would turn and rend you unless you are wise enough to understand that no power has been given to any evil experience. All power is of God, and all power is good. We too often want to share the truth we have with others. We see them in their distresses, and we feel that what we have could be so important to them that we try to rush out and share it with them. But when you're so tempted, please remember this. Remember this teaching of secrecy. Remember that you may gain your neighbor's goodwill, but you just forfeit divine grace. Keep truth within yourself until it has come to fruitage. Meanwhile, give forth the fruitage of truth. Don't give forth the truth you know, but give forth the fruitage, the forgiveness, the prayers, the tithing, all of these things that may be done. But the secret of it all, keep within you until you do know that it is so clearly established in you that you can share it freely and liberally. Well, here we are. We have had 3 lessons, each of which has within it at least 3 important teachings, principles. It is naturally impossible for anyone to absorb them, assimilate them, in hearing them once. Therefore, avail yourself of any opportunity and every opportunity to hear them again, so that you can practice them, you can lock them up within you, ponder them, meditate upon them, until they bring forth fruit after their own kind. And then you'll be grateful, really grateful, for what we have had this week. And so, until we meet in class or until our final lecture, thank you. Good night.